February 26, 1959. Northern Ural Mountains, Soviet Union. A search party finds a tent. It's been cut open from the inside, with knives, by the people who were sleeping in it. There are footprints in the snow leading away from the tent. Barefoot, some in socks, some in a single boot, leading downhill into a forest, into sub-freezing temperatures, into a blizzard. The searchers follow the footprints. What they find over the next few months will haunt Soviet investigators for decades and spawn theories that persist to this day. 9 bodies, all experienced hikers, all dead in ways that made no sense. Some died from hypothermia, expected, but some had injuries that Soviet investigators said were consistent with a high-speed car crash. Massive internal trauma, but no external wounds. No broken bones where there should be broken bones. One was missing her tongue, and eyes, and part of her face, removed with what the coroner described as precision. Another had his eyeballs missing. No explanation why. The tent had been abandoned with everything inside. Food, warm clothes, boots, axes, everything you'd need to survive. They left it all behind and ran into the night wearing almost nothing. Soviet authorities classified the case, sealed the files, closed the area to hikers and researchers for 3 years. The official cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. What does that even mean? This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 experienced hikers died on a mountain under circumstances that have never been adequately explained. Every theory has evidence supporting it. Every theory has evidence disproving it. 66 years later, we still don't know what happened on that mountain. To understand why this case is so disturbing, you need to understand who these people were. This wasn't a group of inexperienced tourists. This was the Soviet Union's hiking elite. Igor Dyatlov, age 23, the group leader, engineering student, experienced hiker, had led multiple winter expeditions, known for meticulous planning and safety protocols. Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, radio engineering student, excellent athlete, had completed multiple difficult winter treks. Rustem Slobodin, 23, engineering student, experienced winter hiker. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both 24, experienced hikers. Krivonishenko had worked at a nuclear facility. This detail becomes important later. Lyudmila Dubinini, 21, economic student, experienced hiker known for her toughness. Alexander Kolovatov, 25, physics student, highly experienced hiker. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 24, construction engineer, winter hiking veteran. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the oldest member, war veteran, experienced outdoorsman who joined the group last minute. Between them, they had decades of winter hiking experience. They knew the mountains. They knew the dangers. They knew how to survive. The plan was to reach Otorten Mountain, a grade 3 difficult winter expedition, the highest difficulty level at the time. Challenging, but within their capabilities. They left on January 27, 1959. The plan was to send a telegram from the village of Vizhay once they returned, expected around February 12th. February 12th came and went. No telegram. The families weren't immediately worried. These expeditions often ran late. But by February 20th, with still no word, the families demanded a search. The search party found their last campsite on February 26th, and that's when everything stopped making sense. The tent was pitched on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. The name in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. The tent was still standing but had been cut open from the inside. Long slashes, made with knives, not torn, cut deliberately. Inside the tent, everything was still there. Warm clothes neatly arranged, boots lined up, food, water, cameras, diaries. The axe was found stuck upright in the snow near the tent. The last diary entries were normal. Routine notes about the hike, the weather. Nothing unusual. Nothing suggesting panic or fear. But something made them cut their way out of the tent and run into a blizzard in the middle of the night, wearing minimal clothing, leaving all their survival gear behind. The footprints told a story. 8 or 9 sets. Some barefoot, some in socks, one in a single boot. Walking, not running. Orderly, in a group. Leading downhill toward the forest about a mile away. Then the footprints disappeared, covered by snow. The searchers followed the direction and found the first 2 bodies near the tree line, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko. They were under a large cedar tree, barefoot, wearing only underwear, dead from hypothermia. But here's what was strange. The cedar tree had branches broken off up to 5 meters high, fresh breaks. Someone had climbed the tree. Why? What were they looking at or looking for? There were the remains of a small fire. They tried to stay warm, failed. The searchers continued and found 3 more bodies between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin. Spread out over several hundred meters, all 3 appeared to have been trying to return to the tent. They died from hypothermia, but Slobodin had a small skull fracture, not fatal, but unexplained. 5 bodies, 4 still missing, and winter was setting in. The search was called off. In May, when the snow melted, they found the last 4 bodies. And that's when the case went from mysterious to deeply disturbing. The final 4 bodies were found in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. They were found under 4 meters of snow. They'd been there since February. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibaut Brignol. Unlike the others, these 4 were better dressed. They were wearing clothes that had been cut from the bodies of the 2 Yuris found under the cedar tree. Someone had gone back and taken clothes from the dead. That suggests they survived longer than the others. They had time to organize, to make rational decisions about survival. But the autopsy results made no sense. Thibaut Brignol had massive skull damage. The medical examiner said the force required would be comparable to a high-speed car crash. But there were no soft tissue injuries, no external wounds, just catastrophic internal damage. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had even worse injuries, multiple rib fractures, severe chest trauma. Again, the medical examiner compared it to a car crash or a shock wave from an explosion, but no external wounds, no broken skin, no burns, no signs of a blast. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her facial tissue, and some soft tissue around the mouth. The coroner noted these were removed, not torn or eaten by animals. The precision suggested they'd been taken peri-mortem or shortly after death. Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. Kolevatov had a deformed neck, but no clear cause. These injuries didn't match hypothermia. They didn't match an avalanche. They didn't match an animal attack. They didn't match anything the investigators had seen before. And there was one more detail. Some of the clothing recovered from the ravine victims tested positive for radiation. Not high levels, but measurable, abnormal. The Soviet investigation concluded in May 1959. The official finding: the group died from a compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. That's not an explanation. That's admitting you have no explanation. The case was classified. The files were sealed. The area was closed to expeditions for 3 years. Investigators who worked the case were told not to discuss it. Well, why? For decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained a footnote, a local mystery. Then, in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the files were partially declassified. Journalists got access. Researchers started investigating. The case exploded internationally, and everyone had a theory. Let's go through the main theories because each one has evidence supporting it and evidence contradicting it. Theory 1. Avalanche. This was actually the conclusion of a 2020 investigation. Researchers used modern avalanche modeling and suggested a delayed slab avalanche hit the tent. The hikers cut their way out, fled to avoid a second avalanche, and died from exposure. Evidence for the injuries to the ravine victims could match being caught in an avalanche. The tent location was on a slope. Avalanches were possible in that area. Evidence against the tent was still standing. An avalanche strong enough to cause those injuries would have destroyed the tent. There was no snow debris piled around the tent. The footprints leading away were orderly, not panicked. The group were experienced winter hikers who wouldn't have camped in an avalanche-prone location. And it doesn't explain the missing eyes and tongue, the radiation, or why they never tried to return to the tent. Theory 2. Military testing. The Ural Mountains were near military test sites. Some researchers suggest the hikers stumbled into a weapons test, missiles, chemical weapons, or experimental devices. Evidence for the radiation on the clothes. Krivonishenko had worked at a nuclear facility. The area was somewhat close to military installations. The Soviet government's secrecy and rapid classification of the case. Lights in the sky were reported by other hikers in the area that night. Evidence against. No evidence of chemical exposure on the bodies. The injuries don't match blast patterns. The radiation levels were too low to indicate a nuclear event. Military testing wouldn't explain why they fled the tent in the first place. And if it was military, why investigate at all? Why not just disappear the bodies? Theory 3. Infrasound. This is one of the more scientific theories. Infrasound is low-frequency sound below human hearing range that can cause panic, dread, and irrational behavior. In certain weather conditions, wind passing over mountains can create infrasound. It can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and an overwhelming urge to flee. Evidence for the Kármán vortex street effect can create infrasound in specific mountain conditions. Studies show infrasound can induce panic. It would explain why they fled the tent irrationally. The orderly footprints suggest they weren't fighting each other, just fleeing something. Evidence against, it doesn't explain the physical injuries. It doesn't explain the missing soft tissue. It doesn't explain the radiation. And experienced hikers would likely recognize the symptoms of altitude or environmental effects. Theory 4. The Mansi people. The local indigenous Mansi people consider the mountain sacred. Some theories suggest the hikers violated sacred ground and were killed. Evidence for the name Dead Mountain. Local warnings about the area. The Mansi had knowledge of the terrain. Evidence against the Mansi were investigated extensively. They had alibis. They had no motive. They were generally friendly with hikers. The injuries don't match weapons the Mansi used, and investigators found no evidence of another group at the site. Theory 5. Paradoxical undressing and hypothermia. This is the most mundane explanation. The group left the tent due to some perceived threat, real or imagined. They died from exposure. The injuries came from falls in the dark. The missing tissue was from scavenging animals. Evidence for Paradoxical undressing is a real phenomenon where hypothermia victims feel hot and remove clothes. All the deaths could technically be attributed to exposure. Evidence against. These were experienced winter hikers who knew hypothermia symptoms. It doesn't explain why they left the tent. It doesn't explain the severity of the internal injuries with no external damage. It doesn't explain the radiation. Scavenging animals typically don't remove tongues and eyes with such precision, and the bodies were under 4 meters of snow. Every theory has holes. Every explanation leaves questions unanswered. In 2019, on the 60th anniversary, the Russian government reopened the case. They investigated with modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, computer modeling, forensic analysis. Their conclusion in 2020, avalanche. The families of the victims rejected this. Researchers rejected this. The evidence doesn't support it. In 2021, another study suggested a slab avalanche with a very specific delay mechanism could explain some injuries, but it still doesn't explain everything. The truth is, we don't know, and we may never know. Here's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident uniquely haunting. It's not just that 9 people died. People die in the mountains, hiking accidents happen. It's the specific details that don't fit any known pattern. Why did they cut the tent from inside? You do that when you need to escape immediately, when going through the door isn't fast enough. What was so urgent? Why were they so orderly? The footprints showed they walked calmly down the mountain, not running, not panicking, just walking, together, into certain death. Why didn't they return to the tent? Even hypothermic, even disoriented, the tent was uphill. It was visible. Some of them made it halfway back before dying. They knew where it was. Why not get the warm clothes, the boots, the supplies? What caused injuries equivalent to car crashes without external wounds? That's not normal blunt force trauma. That's something else. Why were the tongue and eyes missing? And if animals took them, why only those parts? Why with such precision? What about the radiation? Low levels, yes, but measurable, abnormal, unexplained. And why did the Soviet government classify this? If it was just a hiking accident, why the secrecy? The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of the most investigated unsolved mysteries in history. Books, documentaries, movies, hundreds of theories, thousands of researchers. In Russia, Dyatlov Pass is infamous. Every Russian knows the story. It's their Roswell, their JFK assassination, the mystery that defines an era of Soviet secrecy. The mountain pass where they died was officially renamed Dyatlov Pass in 1959, honoring the group leader. You can hike there now. The area was reopened in 1963. Expeditions go regularly. There's a memorial stone at the site. Hikers report feeling uneasy there, probably psychological, probably because they know the story. But the reports are consistent. Something about that mountain feels wrong. Here's my take, for what it's worth. I think something happened that night that terrified them enough to cut through their tent and flee into a blizzard. Something immediate. Something they couldn't fight or reason with. I think they tried to survive. They made rational decisions at first. Stay together. Get to the tree line. Start a fire. Some climbed the tree to look back. Maybe to see if the tent was safe to return to. I think the 4 who lasted longest found shelter in the ravine. Maybe they fell. Maybe they were caught in a small avalanche there. That could explain the crush injuries. I think scavenging animals took the soft tissue after they died. Not precisely, just opportunistically. The coroner's report might have read more into it than was there, but I can't explain what made them leave. I can't explain the radiation. I can't explain why experienced hikers made such fatal decisions. Maybe it was infrasound causing panic. Maybe it was military testing nearby. Maybe it was something mundane that cascaded into tragedy. Or maybe it was something we haven't thought of yet. 9 experienced hikers climbed a mountain in February 1959. Something happened on that mountain. Something that made them choose certain death over staying in their tent. We've been trying to figure out what for 66 years. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. Not because we lack theories. We have hundreds of theories. But because none of them explain everything. The mountain keeps its secrets, and Dead Mountain earned its name.